them over in the chat box, and I will address all the questions to Pastor Neujahr as we get going. And welcome to you, Pastor Troy Neujahr, who is pastor at Our Savior Lutheran Church in Hudson, Michigan. We're glad to have you here, and he will be talking to us about bivocational ministry. But before we get going, let's start with a word of prayer. Gracious Lord, our Heavenly Father, we give you thanks for this day and the opportunity to serve you in your kingdom. Lord, we know that it takes many various issues and forms, and we give thanks for the opportunity that comes before us to talk about bivocational ministry and worker priests. We pray, O Lord, that you would bless our time, bless Pastor Neujahr, and all of those who serve in this very special and unique way in your kingdom. Lord, we pray all this in the name of Jesus. Amen. And Pastor Neujahr, I hand it over to you.
All right, thank you, and amen to that. Thank you. Welcome to you all. I'd just like to begin by thanking you, participants in the webinar, for coming on board, talking about this issue of bivocational ministry today. I want to thank especially LCMS Rural Small Town Mission, and specifically to Amy Gertz and to Pastor Todd Bolbaum for allowing me to host or present today. A couple shout outs too. I think a couple people are with us today that I'd like to give a shout out to: Pastor Larry Wright, Pastor Larry Bean, and a good friend of mine, Pastor David Wilson, each of whom have been kind enough to share some research with me, to share some of their feelings on bivocational ministry, and kind of bounce some theological discussion back and forth on that. So by way of introduction, my story came to my current church as my first call out of seminary, full-time ministry. Like many of you, I just kind of got settled in, learning the ropes, figuring out what to do, and certainly had big bright hopes for a fulfilling, long-term and full-time ministry. But then we bumped into some problems. We had some conflict at our church. We had some death. The economy collapsed, particularly hard hit in my area, where we had at one point over 19% unemployment. Some people moved away. Other people just stayed away. So our church kept shrinking and shrinking, and the offerings, of course, along with it. And things just got more and more financially difficult at our church until the day when one day my chairman, my elder, and I met together. And together they said, "Pastor, we just can't afford a full-time pastor anymore. We're sorry, but we think you should find another call." They gave me about 3 months at that point, that they figured they could hold on for 3 months until I could find another call. And I certainly did look. I talked to my district president. I did everything that I should be doing in order to find a call as Missouri Synod pastor. But boy, at that time, there were just no calls coming. There were just, nobody was moving. Nobody was taking calls because they couldn't sell their homes. They couldn't do this. They couldn't do that. So there were not many calls to be had. So it came down to the wire about the end of that 3 months, and I realized that I've got to do something. So in desperation, I began to search for secular work, something to do in addition to my pastoral ministry in order to try to make ends meet. And so it happened just a few weeks before Christmas of 2010, I believe, that I landed a part-time secular job, and the church and I stumbled headfirst into bivocational ministry. Now it's been nearly 4 years since that point. I've done several different things outside the church in order to supplement my income as pastor. And my church has managed to hang on. More than really hang on, in fact. We discussed at our most recent council meeting that we're on better financial footing than we have been in a long time. We've seen a little bit of growth. Things are starting to look up. And we attribute that, at least in part, to my being able to serve outside the congregation as well as serve within the congregation. So this is what we're talking about today. We're talking about transitioning to bivocational ministry. That means hopefully, or in all likelihood, your story is something like my story. First off, you're transitioning. You're transitioning. You are moving from a full-time ministry to part-time ministry. We're also talking today about bivocation. So two vocations, at least two, for the pastor. And then finally, bivocational ministry. We must realize that, of course, that the ministry at the church still goes on. The word is preached. The sacraments are administered. Now, the details for how that gets done, and in fact, what other aspects of ministry gets done and by whom, those details change, but the fact is the ministry does not. So that's what we're talking about, transitioning to bivocational ministry. How we're going to talk about it? Well, I think I just want to bring this up. I love theology. Like many of you, I love to have theological discussions. I love to study it. I love to banter back and forth with fellow pastors about theology. But see, today we're not really talking about the theological implications of bivocational pastoral ministry. Today, really, we're just going to be very pragmatic. Chances are, if you're watching this webinar, you're already on the edge of transitioning to bivocational ministry, and you just want to know how to get it done. So that's what we're going to do here. Now, there are certainly many more discussions that need to happen on the synodical level, on our district level, even at your circuit level, but this is not the forum to try to make those impactful decisions right now. So we're going to talk about bivocational ministry first from the church's perspective. How do we transition the church from a full-time pastor to a part-time pastor, really? We're going to open that up for some questions at the end of that discussion then. Then we're going to come back and talk about bivocational ministry from the pastor's perspective specifically. And then after we discuss that a little bit, we'll open that up for some questions as well. And then finally, and perhaps, frankly, this discussion we're going to have today is going to involve a lot more than the hour we have available. There's a lot that I've learned over nearly 4 years of doing this. There's a lot more to be learned, how to make this transition successful. So I'd like to keep the conversation going. If I can help you in any way, that was actually the previous slide, Amy. If I can help you in any way, please contact me either through LCMS, World Smile Town Mission. We've got their website should be right there on the slide right now. You can contact me via Twitter at Troy Neujahr, or you're more than welcome to hook up with me on Facebook as well. Yeah. So there's that, and let's get down to it then. First, transitioning to bivocational pastoral ministry from the church's perspective. The picture you see in front of you is really kind of sums up what your church's fears are. You know, you had a church that at one point had the glory days. It had a thriving ministry, but now things are quite possibly on the decline. People are worried about what's going to happen. Are the doors of our church going to close? Are we going to end up with an abandoned building, empty pews? Is the gospel of proclamation at this place going to cease? See, as we transition to bivocational ministry, it implies that previously there was full-time pastoral ministry and you're able to afford that. And in all likelihood, you as a church then are transitioning with your pastor. Now, that might not be the case, but that is the primary focus, of course, of this webinar. If you are not transitioning to bivocational ministry with your pastor, say your pastor took a call and the congregation decided to go to a part-time model, some of this webinar may still apply for you. If your congregation has reduced in size and you're considering going to a dual parish ministry, some of this webinar might also still apply to you as well. However, our focus again is transitioning to bivocational ministry, to a worker priest model. So if there's a quick rundown of options for vacant congregations transition to part-time ministry, just really quickly on that, some things you could do is call a retired pastor. Your district president is going to have a list of available pastors in your area. It's quite possible that one of them or some of them might even be willing to live in your parsonage if you have one. A lay leader in your congregation could go to the Synod's specific ministry program. And again, your district president or your circuit visitor would have some information on that. Now that, of course, may result in bivocational ministry, or it may not, depending upon the vocational status of the person undertaking the program. And then finally, of course, if you're a congregation that is currently vacant, you could call a new pastor specifically into bivocational ministry. This is actually something I've seen done in a few times in the recent few years. And of course, you as a congregation, you want to communicate that up front and early on in the call process to your new potential pastor. But back to the idea of transitioning to bivocational ministry. So you've got your full-time pastor, you're moving forward into bivocational ministry with him. This is liable to be a difficult decision for you as a congregation. You know, there's feelings of doom, of gloom, sort of grieving over the bygone days of a thriving church, and definitely sort of grieving in advance over what is now viewed as the inevitable closing of the church doors. Your church, you congregations probably have a sense of a wounded pride. You know, a church that can no longer care for their pastor. They feel that. They feel that deeply. And these are real considerations. These are real issues that churches are facing. And as I spoke with one of my friends who has navigated these waters from full-time ministry to bivocational ministry, he said that at their church, you know, that they sat down and the church in a meeting really had to decide what they were willing to do, how far they were willing to go. Your church needs to wrestle with that for a little while, just to be able to decide for themselves, is this a path we're willing to take? Now, pragmatic concerns, just strategies for transitioning to having a part-time pastor. One of the first things you want to do is identify the reasons why a part-time pastor, a bivocational pastor, may be necessary. Are there finances, financial issues at the church? Has some sort of crisis precipitated this? Are there more ministry demands being placed upon the church? So are you adding maybe now a second pastor and he's going to be bivocational in addition to one full-time pastor? And as you go through these, you want to discuss and pray. If your current pastor is full-time and you want to move on to bivocational ministry, first thing you want to do is discuss and pray whether your pastor should just seek another call. Bivocational ministry is a hard road. It really is, for the church and for the congregation as well. Nobody is going to blame anybody if they decide they can't walk down to it, if they decide they can't commit to bivocational ministry. But if you talk with your pastor and you pray with him and you discuss that, and we'll come up with questions in a few minutes, but as you talk with your pastor, you discuss that, and you decide that, yes, pastor and church can both commit to a bivocational ministry model. One of the first things you want to do is determine a time frame, an agreed upon time frame determine a time frame and agreed upon plan for that time frame. How soon does your pastor need to have a job? How long might it take to find a job in his chosen field? Does he need to get some certifications first in order to get a job in a particular field? And what is the church's plan for the interim? Now, of course, in the midst of all of that, it runs the very real question, what will our finances sustain? It's a valid question. Now, if pastor might need 2 years of training in order to get recertified for a specific vocation and then start looking for work, will the church's finances be able to hold out that long? This is also a valid question. And as a pastor of a church, I might want you as a congregation to consider what you've been willing to go into debt for in the past. Congregations go into debt for all sorts of things, whether it be a roof or a building addition or repairing the air conditioner, what have you. Are you also willing to go into debt as a short-term plan in order to be able to keep your pastor? Consider that. Now, while you talk about these things, you're also going to talk about what type of salary, what type of benefits the church can continue to provide. Now, you congregational members, I want you to be frank about this. I want you to be open about this. I want you to be honest and compassionate in discussing this with your pastor. Above all, do not assume that your pastor will or will not be able to accept that package. Discuss that with him. Let him and his family make the determination if they need to seek another call, or if they can, or if he's in fact going to be able to seek outside employment and take the compensation package that you're able to offer. And pastors, while we're here, you might be the one who has to interject some reality here. You might be the one who has to say, look, no, the church can't afford full-time pastorate anymore. However, if you could afford this much salary, I think I could find some outside work that would make up the difference. Now, as you move this far into it, so you've got the whole thing, you've got the time frame set down, you've got your plan set down for how soon you can be bivocational ministry. As you go all the way into that and you actually then begin bivocational ministry, you as a congregation need to sit down with pastors. So leadership and pastor need to sit down and together decide upon a list of ministry priorities. So number one on the list has to happen every single week. You cannot miss out on number one whatsoever. Number two probably also has to happen every week. Number three, if you get down to number three on the list, that maybe we understand if this doesn't necessarily happen some weeks, if you get busy, so on and so forth. And you go on down to the bottom of the list, deciding upon which areas of pastoral ministry are absolutely crucial, vital, critical, and have to happen every week, or things down at the bottom of the list that you are going to acknowledge that will rarely, if ever, get done by your pastor any longer. Now, those things at the bottom of the list, if they are still important to your church, you need to seriously discuss and plan to then give those responsibilities over to volunteers. Now, some examples, obviously, if you want to keep your church rolling, you've got to have weekly worship every single Sunday, word and sacrament. That's got to be number one on the list. You get further on down the list, you might encounter things like home visits. Some people in your church are still going to want home visits. Other people may need a home visit from the pastor. Hospital visits, there's a good one. Is pastor going to be able to be at every single hospital event? Is he going to be able to be at every single procedure if he's working outside the church? Well, no. No, he's not. So who will be that person? Other things worthy of consideration for you as a congregation, things like funerals, weddings. You are now going to have restrictions on your pastoral time, and you're going to need some flexibility in things like establishing when a funeral can be. Previously you had a funeral on any particular day you wanted, and you simply told Pastor, the funeral's going to be Tuesday, and Pastor would be there. But what if he's at work? What if his day off is on Wednesday? Can you have that flexibility as a congregation to move things like that around a little bit, so the pastor can continue to serve in the way God has called him to? Extra services like Advent or Lent, you may need to schedule those around pastoral's weekly work schedule. An example, in my congregation, at one point in time, I was simply not available on Wednesday evenings, our traditional night for the Advent and Lent services, and we ended up having to move those to Tuesdays. No one complained, everyone understood. But the fact of the matter is, it was a necessity because of my outside work schedule. I guess other things too, some congregations might feel a bit comforted by rewriting call documents. If you've actually gotten this far in the process, you've now got a bivocational pastor, you might actually want to rewrite call documents. We have not done it at my church. I don't really feel a need for it, but I know that there's some congregations, some pastors that may be more comfortable formally rewriting and formally ratifying those call documents. But now some things that we have done here, for instance, like with my insurance coverage. Initially, we officially revised with the Concordia Health Plan how many hours a person must work at the church in order to be able to be offered that health plan. I think previously we had said anyone with 40 hours or more per week can be offered the health plan. We revised that down to 20 hours or more per week so that the church could continue to honestly provide me with health care. But now, as time went on, and I went full-time work outside the church, my church offered, and quite generously, I believe, to provide me additional salary for whatever portion of health insurance would come out of my secular paycheck. So, see, the church had decided that they would help provide me with health insurance if we weren't going to do with the Synod's official Concordia Health Plan anymore. The church said, okay, Pastor, this much comes out of your check. We will then supplement that back as your pastoral salary to offset that coverage. Still a win for them, of course, because it's less than the total cost would have been that we were paying for as a church for pastor and family. Through our other plans, so it worked out. And I guess finally, just from the congregation's perspective, just some general helpful hints, if you will. One of my congregation members, when I talked to them about this upcoming webinar, this thing we're doing right now today, and I asked, hey, what were some of the good things that we did here that I could help share with other churches? What are some of the things that were a real challenge for us? One of my members said it was really helpful to the congregation that I always kept them informed about when I'm working, about where I'm working, just about the fact that I'm working. It helps them understand where my time is being spent. Now, personally, I tend to do that informally. I'll use an illustration during a sermon that came from my secular job. Make mention of something that I'm doing outside of church in the announcements after church. But I also make a point to do that on a formal level as well. For instance, my monthly pastoral report to the church council. I always try to make a point of saying, hey, this is my upcoming schedule. This is what's going on. This is where I'm going to be working in the next few weeks and months. I've got this coming up, and so just to make you fully aware of that. Other helpful hints, as we discussed this as a council, one of the things we actually realized that we've not been able to do very well recently is have set open church office hours. Now, we don't have, for instance, a secretary who is on site. We do have a secretary that puts the bulletin together, does some other things, but she's not on site at the church. And so it's really difficult for us to have set office hours when anyone can just walk into the church and talk to someone from the church. So you might want to consider that. Is there a time or a day that you can guarantee that someone's going to be in the office to receive visitors, to give out information, maybe to give aid or assistance to people who ask for it? And if you can't do that, for instance, like with my outside work schedule, it's just so crazy right now that it varies so much from week to week that we can't have set open office hours. I can't guarantee there will be a specific time that I'll be in the office. So if you're like that and you can't do that, you might want to consider what you need to do to create an open and easy channel of communication to the pastor, from the congregation to the pastor. Can the church's phone ring into someone's house so they can always be someone there to answer it? Can you have a visual voicemail service? So if they are going to leave a voicemail for you, does it show up as an email in your email inbox and you can just read it? Could you forward the church's phone calls to a cell phone if someone would be able to answer those? Any way to keep that flow of communication happening would be important. And then finally, and I'm sure the ladies will be glad to hear this, one of the key things I think too in keeping the church just rolling along as pastor now has his time divided is keep the ladies guild strong. The ladies do so much for the church. And in many churches, they're really the backbone, making sure that everything keeps running behind the scenes. So pastors and congregations both keep your ladies guild strong. What I want to do now is maybe open up some questions from the congregation's perspective. If you have some, I see Pastor Todd is back. Hi, Todd. And Amy, we're actually just a few slides backwards, I think, from, we'd back up a few, no, the other way. There we go. But what questions do you have that as your church transitions to a bivocational ministry, what questions do you have that can help your church navigate these waters? Oh, Todd, can't hear you. Todd?
Now we should be okay. All right. Bradley Birch had a question about debt and some of these guys coming into seminary and of course then out of seminary with a fairly massive amount of debt. That is a big challenge for congregations and especially if you're looking at bivocational ministry, how much a pastor is going to have to earn to be able to even just cover the debt. I don't know if you have any thoughts on that, Troy, but I know there are several initiatives right now in the LCMS to address the specter of college debt, of student loans, in making them making things more affordable, but even maybe more importantly, helping congregations understand through stewardship the importance of this matter as well. So there are a few initiatives going on right now in the seminaries and for new pastors coming out that I'm aware of that are addressing this specific issue.
Well, and yeah, I've heard of a few of those. I've read some information on that. I've discussed that with a few people as well. But yeah, it's a very, very real concern. Not only for bivocational ministers, but for full-time ministers as well, obviously, because depending on how much debt you come out of seminary and then maybe college debt before that as well, the amount of money you need to make just to be able to retire that debt in some sort of reasonable fashion is quite a bit. In all honesty, I found it almost impossible right now to help to work towards retiring that debt as a bivocational pastor. Others might have a different story, but in terms of in terms of what the LCMS is doing about that, I'm not the best person to answer those questions. Perhaps someone else who's a synodical guy. Wait, right there. There. Yeah, a synodical guy might have some better answers for us on that.
Well, there are certainly some resources, and if anyone does want to avail themselves of those resources, both on a congregational or personal level, feel free to get a hold of us, and we'll get them in contact with the right folks. Not a problem. We have another question from Dr. Keith Schweitzer up in Iowa, and he says, I'm concerned about the thought of embarrassing the congregation by working somewhere in public where he's seen that a pastor might do that. How about the outside work being done privately or from the home?
Yeah, that's very doable. I've done some of that myself. There are plenty of vocational options to be able to work from home, whether that be on the internet or I've done some freelance editing. Pastors often can be very involved with freelance writing. Pastor can do all sorts of things working from home. However, kind of the underlying issue there, of course, is the thought of embarrassing the congregation. It might be fairly blunt, but I think my advice on that would be you just kind of have to get over that. Because, well, and I'm going to address a little bit of that, I think, in my message to pastors here, coming up in a few minutes. But what we'll find, I think, in the secular world is that not many people actually think along those lines. I think the church thinks along those lines. Oh, it looks so bad upon us to have pastor working outside. The pastor thinks along those lines. But people in the world don't tend to have those thoughts. I've not met anyone yet who, looked down upon me or my church simply because I had an outside job.
Very good. And I think you had made a very good point where if you do the legwork up front and get all the planning done, hopefully you can avoid some of those more sticky situations like that. Moving on, because we have several more comments and questions here. We have one mentioning about if a pastor is working during the week, and maybe you'll address this in the next section, Troy, but making it difficult to make district and circuit functions, which are typically during the week.
Yeah, they are. I managed to attend one circuit winkle. Actually, no, I attended two circuit winkles this year, mostly because I was unemployed at that time and between secular jobs. Before that, at least a year before that, since I was been able to attend a winkle. Maybe some other pastoral gatherings that happen in the evening, but the reality is that a lot of our stuff is still geared towards full-time ministers. You can, of course, speak with your brother pastors in the circuit to see, hey, is there some way that you can involve me in these things? Can you hold a meeting in the evening? Can we get together on the weekend or maybe even a Sunday afternoon? Anything to where you can stay in the loop. And I will say that's going to be important, too, because the life of a bivocational minister often feels very, very lonely because he is no longer connected to, as closely connected to the brother pastors that he was connected to before. So it isolates the pastor. It can isolate the church a little bit because the pastor then is isolated from the rest of the circuit as well. So that is going to be an obstacle to overcome.
Not that I want to have a shameless plug, but we are in our office working on some ways that we can provide support to bivocational pastors, and we are actually working on looking at trying to host a bivocational pastor respite retreat and some things of that nature as well. So that we're trying to put some things like that together. Moving on, we had a question about the current number of worker priests and any projections about how many congregations will be affected in the future. I am not aware of that statistic being out there, the full number of worker priests out there. some of the districts have a good handle on that, but I don't know, Troy, if you've heard anything. What I do hear from district executives is that they are projecting that this will become a greater and greater necessity as we move into the future.
I don't have any specific numbers here either myself. In some of the research that I've done, I know, for instance, the Episcopalians and Presbyterians and even the Methodists are all commenting upon this, that it's becoming more and more common to have bivocational or even perhaps unpaid ministers in their congregations. Just kind of anecdotal evidence from around my district, around our synod. At one point in time, with my district president's permission, of course, I had emailed a number of other district presidents and said, look, it's not that, I hate my church, I love my church, I'd like to stay, but there's these circumstances and I think I might need to look for another call. I'm currently bivocational, so on and so forth. And a number of the DPs had responded back to that email saying, yeah, that's the situation that seems to be on the rise everywhere. So a number of them are aware of this. It's becoming increasingly common. And that's one of the reasons I'm so glad for Pastor Todd and Amy and Rural Small Town Mission to be able to host this, because I think it helps us realize that that bivocational ministry is not an isolated incident, but is actually on the rise, becoming more and more common all the time. Matter of fact, if you read some articles, that there are people who are very just simply convinced that this is the wave of ministry in the future.
I've read several articles to that effect as well. One more question really quick here, and maybe a couple more before we move on, but we're going to have to keep moving on, unfortunately. There's a question about church planting and maybe looking at bivocational model in a church plant, such as in a resort town. And the question is the lay program or SMP a good option for the bivocational model? And is it realistic when it takes, for one 20-minute sermon, 10 to 20 hours of preparation? That's the two questions I throw out to you here, Troy.
We'll address the issue of sermon preparation in the following segment.
Okay.
Regarding the SMP, of course, it's no secret there are a lot of people around the Synod who have some reservations about the SMP, and that it might not be the way to go. But I think upon reflection is that the SMP seems to be born of of a certain foresight that understands that the seminaries apparently and district presidents seem to understood the future of ministry, and that things like a full seminary education might not be financially viable in the future. Whether or not it's a good option for the bivocational model, I'm going to reserve judgment on that. I think it's an option. Personally, being a seminary-trained pastor, I have a great affinity for my seminary, and I have a great appreciation for my time there. And I wish more men could enjoy that. But there's no doubt that the SMP is an option. Whether or not it's a good option, the only option, it's certainly not the only option, but it is an option and should be considered.
Very good. There was one mention of because we enter into these situations oftentimes because of finances, that it becomes difficult. And one person had mentioned about being able to afford to do district and circuit events. And just to let you know, the retreat that we're trying to put together would be, hopefully, the cost would be covered. We're looking at getting all grants to take care of that. So I just thought I'd throw that out there. One more thing, and then we've got to move forward because we're running out of time. How about mechanisms created with a culture of intentional bivo pastor models than creating a bivo model as a survival kit? I kind of like that idea. Intentional bivocational pastors as opposed to survival.
Yeah, actually, you know what? The cutting edge churches are actually starting to do this. I've got some friends from some other denominations that recently planted a church with the full intention that no matter how big they get, their ministers would always be bivocational. And there are some viable reasons for that. I think the question says do that rather than a survival kit. Of course, bivocational ministry in some cases is going to be the survival plan for the church. But as far as the deliberate plan goes, sure, it can very much work that way. It's often very exciting, and people who do that view it as a way to keep their pastor strongly active in the community. He's always out and about. He's always meeting people through his work, through his outside job, and the churches that focus upon that really believe it actually increases their ministry presence in the community rather than decreases it.
Very good. Thank you, Troy. We're going to have to move forward, so I hope we got most of the questions. We've got to keep moving.
Okay. All right. Yeah, there will be more, and of course they're on the chat bar there, and you are more than welcome to contact me or Rural Small Town Mission as well. Now, moving on, bivocational ministry from the pastor's consideration, and this is where it hits home for me and for many of you as well. There are some significant emotional things to consider. The fact of the matter is that full-time ministry, at least for us in the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod, has been kind of the standard for as long as many of us can remember, going back even to maybe our grandparents' generation. And it seems to me that anything less than full-time ministry does not match up with our expectations. And very often it's true that pastors who are put into bivocational ministry have feelings of inadequacy. They have feelings of loss. They have feelings of defeat. We talked earlier about the issue of shame or embarrassment over having to find a different job. And I can tell you from personal experience that's very, very true. But also, too, you want to know something that's really, really funny? Recently, I think in April, got a job at Lowe's in the next town over. And as I began to meet my coworkers, I don't advertise that I'm a pastor. But a couple people ask, what else do you do? And so I would tell a few people, and word began to get around. And people then started to ask me, oh, so I hear you're a pastor. Well, yes, I am. And the next question inevitably would be, do you have a large church? And occasionally, at least on one occasion, are you the senior pastor? So you see, the outside world, they have no concept of, oh, this pastor is a failure because he has to work. Rather, people seem to assume that my church is large or that I have multiple pastors on staff, and still I decide to work as a customer service associate at Lowe's. So it's kind of funny in that aspect. Or this one. Now, this is just a real fresh illustration. As I'm getting ready for this webinar today, my little daughter comes up to me. And she says, what's that special thing you're doing again today, Daddy? And I explained, well, honey, how Daddy works full-time. Daddy works outside the church in addition to being a pastor. Hey, Todd, I think your microphone might still be on. But I explained to my daughter how Daddy works outside the church in addition to being a pastor. And I said, look, and not all pastors work outside the church. Did you know that? And my little girl said, no. So, there's just this idea of a preconception, a personal expectation that, feelings of failure for you as a potential bivocational pastor who used to be full-time, those feelings of failure are just tied to your personal expectation that full-time ministry is the only real kind of ministry. However, full-time ministry is not the reality for the vast majority of pastors throughout the world. America is changing, and it's entering into a post-Christian era. And I think the face of the ministry is apparently changing along with it. So don't let your personal expectations determine whether or not you feel that you failed at ministry. Now, I'd like to give you some strategies for finding outside work. Excuse me. One, obviously, you just need to decide what kind of income you're going to need. That's first and foremost. Do you need part-time supplementary income? Can you get by with something like that? Or do you need full-time income with benefits? What do you need to be able to support yourself and your family, if you have one, in bivocational ministry? Also, moving on from that, consider what talents or skills you have. Now, and think, of course, in very broad terms. Many pastors don't think that they're good at anything except for, preaching and teaching. And, more of us think that we're good at that than actually are. So consider what talents and skills you have. Think in broad terms so you can more readily see what avenues of employment might be open to you. For instance, I worked for about 3 years at an internet service provider as technical support. And really, that job was just born out of kind of a natural geekiness, kind of a nerdiness, a love of computers, and knowledge of computers that got me into that job. I mentioned earlier that I work at Lowe's, and I got involved with that job simply from being a handyman around the house, running the low power tools and build things. That's how I got into that job. But beyond that, you as a pastor have a lot of skills. You have skills in leadership. You have skills in volunteer management. You have skills in counseling. You have skills in the English language. Oh, and you also teach, don't you? That's another thing that I do yet as well. I was able to get connected with not one, but two separate universities in the area, teaching as an adjunct professor. Because, and right there on my resume when I apply to that, is that, hey, I teach over 50 times a year. I communicate truths constantly in my job. So when you're looking for a job, think in very broad terms of what kind of skills you have, so you can more readily see what jobs might be available to you. Beyond that, decide what kind of flexibility you need. How many hours per week can you commit to outside the church? And then seek a job that fits that bill just perfectly. Seek a job that fits that bill perfectly. Now, you might not find that job, but you might also be surprised in what God brings you. Now, if you can't find a job that fits the bill perfectly, obviously, don't neglect opportunities that can work and work well if you just had a little more flexibility on your part. But look for a job that really connects there. And regardless of what you do or how you find a job, be sure to communicate to your new employer that you are a pastor. Not to curry favor with them, not to try to impress them, but simply to say that, hey, I'm a pastor, I have a congregation, there will be times when I might need some flexibility with this job. Communicate to them. There will come a day when a funeral comes up and you're going to need time off to go do that funeral. You're going to have to communicate to them that there's no circumstance whatsoever that you would be able to work on Sunday mornings. So communicate with your employer what kind of flexibility you need to have with them. But at the same time as well, too, if those times when you actually need flexibility, make sure it's a genuine pastoral emergency. Genuine pastoral emergency. Obviously, we've all experienced some different things that someone said, Pastor, I need you, but they didn't really need you. Now, obviously, if there's been a car accident, someone's lying in the hospital on their deathbed, you need to go. But there's a lot of other things that you can simply say, as pastor, I'm at work right now. Can I call you back in a couple hours? Personal expectations of you as pastor. I really hate to say this because my brain does not work this way at all, but you're going to need to learn. You must learn to lower your expectations of yourself. Pastor, if you're going to be working outside the church in addition to working inside the church, you're not going to be able to do everything that you used to do. Some things are going to need to be entrusted and completely entrusted to other people. Other things in church simply will no longer get done. You're going to have to be okay with that. Sermon prep, we talked about that earlier. No matter what, no matter what your current pattern of sermon prep is, you're not going to have the luxury of having that much time anymore. You'd have to learn to take some shortcuts with sermon prep and be okay with that. Allow yourself the freedom not to feel guilty about that. And there's a lot of good resources out there. There's Concordia pulpit resources. There's the Big Blue Book commentaries. There's a great website called textweek.com. They're all quick and good sources of material for your sermon. But the idea of saying that you're going to spend 20 hours preparing a 20-minute message, you don't have that you don't have that kind of time anymore. So you're going to have to learn to lower your expectations, to take some shortcuts, and not feel guilty. Honestly, for Lent and Advent, my flat-out advice would be simply just to buy a sermon series. Not kidding at all. Buy one. Concordia St. Louis, I think, puts one out every year, so I think does CPH. There's other people that put out sermon series for those special seasons. Just buy one. Buy one with the whole sermon written out. Now, all you got to do is maybe tweak it a little bit. Your people still your people still get a good gospel-centered law and gospel message. You didn't have to invest hours and hours and hours that you don't have into creating that message. And you still have then time, of course, to set up your own unique message for Sunday, or reverse them. Preach the Purchase Sermon Series on Sunday and preach your own message series on the midweek service. And by the way, I don't make any bones about that with the congregation. I tell them straight up front, hey, tonight's message comes from such and such and so forth. I don't make any apologies for that, and I don't make any bones about that. And then finally, one of the things we do as pastors is read, and we read a lot. We read probably more than anyone else in the United States. And frankly, reading time also is going to be cut way back. My reading time is cut way back more than I'd like, but I don't know what else to do. I'm out of time. So I try not to feel guilty about that, but I do spend what time I can reading. I read on my lunch breaks. I read on my breaks at work. And I also, by the way, use those for sermon prep time as well, too. And if you get an hour lunch break, you've got 60 minutes to use to prepare, to read, to do anything else other than just watch YouTube videos for 60 minutes. So I guess all that put together is, Pastor, if you're going to go to bivocational ministry, you need to have some time management skills as well. Be able to know how much time you've got, how much time you need, and be able to find all the slots and fill up your time with sermon prep, reading, all the things you need to do. This means, of course, that you're always going to be on. You're always going to be on the go. You're always going to be doing something. And that does get to be a burden after a while. But it's important that you be able to stay focused on who you are and what you're doing and why. You are God's called representative of that congregation. And you are serving a good and valuable ministry. You are continuing to provide word and sacrament ministry for that congregation, even sometimes at your own personal cost. And that's a good thing. So don't feel bad about it. All right, what I want to do, we've got a few minutes left. Pastor Todd had promised me we could go overboard on time, not overboard, over on time if we needed to. What questions do you have as pastors as you transition to bivocational ministry? Oh, microphone.
I leave it on when I don't need it, and I don't turn it back on when I do. You'd think this is my first webinar. Anyway, we will run over a couple of minutes here. That's not a problem if we want to get some questions answered. Please type your questions in that chat section. But one of the questions that came up was simply, and a good one, are there too many pastors? But this was followed by another question about, and we appreciate Dr. Schweitzer for mentioning that this is a topic that needs some serious attention, and that's why we're doing that. But down the road, the fact that the future may not hold such a thing as retirement, and I think this offers an opportunity for folks to really take a look at that. I know currently in the Synod, I don't know if you can say, are there too many pastors? I don't know that you could say there are too many, but certainly we are not in the shortage end of things like one would wonder. However, as we move forward in the very near future, projections show us just simply by attrition, as baby boomers continue to age, we are looking at the possibility of some fairly significant shortfalls in the number of guys who are out there serving. So that's certainly an issue. And because of economies and things like that, retirement is an interesting topic to consider. What do you think there, Troy?
My own opinion on that, I've never met a pastor who actually retired.
Always busier.
Yeah. Every single retired pastor I've met is hanging around the congregation. They're still trying to do. They want to do visits. They're still active in people's lives, and so the idea of retirement, brothers. I mean, you don't care for people's souls for 30, 40, 50, 60 years, and then just shut that off. So the idea of retiring, I don't see pastors who do that anyway. They always find something to do to serve the kingdom.
I certainly think that just in a broad sense, across the economy, whether it be in the church or secular, I think retirement is going to be a bygone thing here if things keep moving the way they seem to be, and that certainly opens the door for some consideration of how we do these kind of bivocational things into the future, as we maybe try to at least slow down a little bit.
Yes.
I think, folks, we've got a few minutes here for questions. We're not getting any new ones here that I'm seeing. So what I'm going to do here is I'd like to let everybody know we do have some important things coming up, and I'll give you a minute here as I go over these things. Oh, wait, here we go. How involved or not was your DP or circuit visitor in the transition to worker priest?
Not.
Okay.
I think part of my struggle as becoming a worker priest, becoming a bivocational pastor, is what I hinted at earlier, that feeling of isolation. And that's a very real thing. I think there's a certain aspect to that if you as a congregation or you as a pastor can work out your own problems, go bivocational, then the district president, is one less thing for him to have to worry about. DPs are busy guys. They've got a lot of congregations, a lot of things to do, and they are frequently heavily occupied with a lot of different issues. So while I certainly try to keep district in the loop, try to keep our circuit visitor in the loop as well. The reality, I think, for us is that they didn't have a lot to offer us as we went into bivocational ministry, other than just their prayers and their encouragement.
Okay, we're having some technical issues, I think, but we're okay.
Okay.
One other question we got here. With more WPs, worker priests, will there be more Sunday-only congregations? I have some thoughts on that topic, but Pastor Neujahr, I'll throw it to you.
Well, why don't we throw it to you first and hear your thoughts?
Well, certainly what we're about doing is trying to avoid that kind of Sunday-only mentality. And the ministry of the congregation goes on all the time, everywhere. And I think what we're trying to help folks recognize is that, as you mentioned earlier, as the pastor looks at what he has on his plate and using good delegation skills, getting the congregation involved, because many congregations think that the pastor should be in charge of everything. And certainly in a worker priest model, that's simply impossible. And it gives that congregation an opportunity to take ownership of some of the ministry things that are going on and taking those and running them into the future. And sometimes in far greater ways than a pastor ever could have by himself. Soapbox.
Yeah, definitely the idea of more hands helping out. I think kind of one of the points you're getting at is when somebody does everything, then nobody else has to.
Right.
But suddenly pastor is not able to do all those things and things are getting left undone, people do step up to the plate and they see things that they can do. But beyond that, of course, the key word here, I think, is bivocational. And, we Lutherans love to talk about this idea of vocation. It's actually one of my favorite theological topics. And it simply means that, hey, wherever you go, God has a purpose for you there. And so one thing I am learning is that, throughout the week, I carry out, in my respective vocations, I carry out the ministry that God would have me do there. Not to say that, I'm preaching at Lowe's or anything like that, because I'm not. That's not part of my vocation. But as I go throughout my weekly life, I find more and more opportunities to be able to minister to people, to hear them, to give good biblical advice, and even be asked for that a lot of times as well. And so not a Sunday-only congregation at all, but I think for me, and I get a sense from my congregation as well, that they find themselves in more and more situations throughout the week where they are carrying out their respective vocations and helping other people see God's light a little more clearly.
Very good. Thank you. A great question from Ann in St. Ansgar, Iowa. How do you see technology use, such as webinars, helping us, that is the congregation, the church, maintain unity?
Well, hey, I think this webinar is great. Thanks again to Todd and Amy. And also, too, hey, the reality as a bivocational minister, I can't attend circuit winkles. I'm really limited in my district involvement. But with things like webinars, all I need is a free hour and a computer. I don't feel comfortable traveling, great distances to attend big seminars. But on a webinar, I can stay connected. I can also, stay connected through other means like social media, Twitter, Facebook, and stay connected to other pastors there, and receive comfort and consolation from them, as well as comfort and console them too. So technology, I think, has the capacity, has the ability to help us stay connected as community.
Very good. Thank you. And I agree completely. This webinar is a great example. Those of you that don't know both of us, we were at the seminary overlapping at times, and it was nice to reconnect. That was great. This is a great opportunity. Any other questions out there? I'm just looking at some of the posts that are popping up, seeing if we've got any questions. Okay, so well, for many of you, you are living this out right now, and we give you thanks for your service to the church and the Lord's work here, and thank you very much, Pastor Neujahr, for your words today. A couple of reminders: we do have some more webinars coming up. We have them every month on Thursdays. Just watch our website for that information, or our Facebook page. But the ones coming up in the near future, September 18th, we have prepared, Ready to Witness and Ruling Sound, presented by Reverend Benjamin Meyer. We are going to actually, hopefully, God willing, run our webinar we had to miss out on because of technical problems in July. So we'll be rerunning, or initially running, Witnessing Grandparents by Dr. Richard Bimler. And that will be October 23rd. And Christmas Outreach by Rich Kors of Lutheran Hour Ministries will be November 20th. And we'll have another webinar on rural church planning by Reverend David Johnson from up at Becker, Minnesota. Those are all coming up. Watch all the information that's coming out on our different events, such as our national conference, which is coming up in Kansas City in November. And we all the information that we put out. If you want any more information that on what we had today, or any other topics that you might need some assistance with in rural and small town ministry especially, please feel free to contact our office at any time. Any other comments for the good of the order?
Just one thing, we did have a slide a little while ago indicating that had some resources to further the discussion on bivocational ministry. Amy has said she can also put that up online if you would like, or just simply ask her for that. It's got some good helpful links to some good resources, some stories around the web about bivocational ministry.
Yeah, please just send us an email or give our office a call and we'll be happy to get that out to you without any trouble. Okay, well, thank you again for being here. Thank you again, Pastor Neujahr, for assisting us with this today and presenting. God's blessings to all of you. May the Lord bless you and keep you. May the Lord lift his face upon you and be gracious unto you. May the Lord look upon you with his favor and give you peace. Amen.
Amen. Thank you.